Before I begin my story, I want you to do something for me. Take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear is not just a story about betrayal. It's a story about survival, about what happens when the ground beneath you crumbles and you have no choice but to stand anyway. If you've ever carried secrets heavier than your own body could bear, if you've ever given everything only to be repaid with silence and lies, then this story will echo inside you. Stay with me until the end. And if my voice reaches you, if you feel even a part of my pain, don't forget to subscribe, leave your comment, and share this video, because no one should ever carry the weight of betrayal alone. The zipper teeth caught for a second like they did not want to be part of this, and when they finally slid open, the air changed. Damp concrete, old bleach, and the sweet stale perfume that did not belong to me. Under a folded navy sweater I had never seen, I found the blue cover of a Portuguese passport and a crisp envelope with a boarding pass tucked inside. One way. Savannah to New York to Lisbon. April 3, 2024. Seat 12A. Passenger name, Eva Martins. My hand shook so badly the paper whispered as if it were alive. I remember thinking that the ticket felt heavier than it should, as if it had weight from all the lies it dragged behind it. It was 2:17 in the morning, March 18th, and the washing machine upstairs was thumping through a late spin cycle like a distant, indifferent heart. I was barefoot on the cold basement floor, toe pressing into a crack I had sealed with caulk last summer when I still believed fixing small things kept the big things from breaking. I did not scream. I did not run upstairs. I stood in the cone of the single bulb and watched dust float like ash. The suitcase itself was the kind we could never afford when we married in 2011, when our honeymoon was a bus to St. Augustine and a motel with a broken ice machine. This one was hard shell, brushed silver, new. For years I thought love was measured in patient repairs and shared calendars, in loyalty that did not need to be performed in public because it was carved into the private hours. I worked double shifts at Memorial Hospital, swallowing back the metallic taste of caffeine at 3 in the morning, so our mortgage would not keep me awake by whispering numbers. $1,286 on the first of the month, $900 more on insurance and the second car payment, $200 on his brother's medical debt because family is family, he said. He called it our team. He said we were building a future. He said travel would come later, after we had something solid under our feet. I believed him the way I believe in gravity. You do not argue with what keeps you from floating away. The first suitcase had appeared in January, behind the water heater, the handle tucked inward like a held breath. He said it was for a work trip to Atlanta in March, 2 nights, a conference about supply chain software. He even sent me a link to the event in an email with a subject line that looked like the others he sent from work, with times and keynote speakers and a beige logo. I clicked, skimmed, shrugged, and moved on. There is a special kind of blindness marriage asks of you, the soft focus that lets you forgive and forget. There is also a soft fog that the person you trust can pump into your vision when they decide you should not see. He started locking his phone, then said the IT team required it after a data breach. He set his laptop to sleep the second he closed it, said battery life was better that way. He began keeping receipts in his wallet, then said taxes were more complicated this year. He asked me not to do laundry on Tuesdays because he had gym nights and wanted to handle his own clothes. He said it with a smile so light it barely disturbed the air. I nodded because I had learned that the easiest way to live with someone is to accept their small mysteries as harmless. The second suitcase arrived in February, midnight on a Wednesday. I heard the soft roll of wheels on the driveway and assumed it was a neighbor. In the morning, he said he had swapped his old bag with a coworker who bought the wrong size, a casual trade in a parking lot outside a burrito place. He told me the coworker's name, Rick, and then told me about Rick's recent divorce and his 2 sons and how the older one played trombone badly and wanted to quit. He added details like sunshine until I could not see the shape of what he was really describing. Every lie needs a town to live in. He built one. When I lifted the sweater and that passport blinked its gold emblem at me, something slid into place in my chest with a click so clean it was almost relief. The picture on the passport was a woman in her 30s with brown hair tucked behind one ear, a birth date of May 14, 1989. a calm mouth that looked used to being kissed. The boarding pass showed April 3rd, 6:05 a.m. from Savannah, connecting through JFK, arriving Lisbon 7:10 a.m. the next day. I noticed the frequent flyer number printed faintly beneath her name and felt petty fury that she even had points, that she had earned miles from flying toward my life. In the zippered pocket, I found a small black notebook, the kind I buy for grocery lists. The first page held numbers, euro signs, and a list in his handwriting that I knew better than my own. Rent, February and March paid. Deposit returned. Storage unit 306 cleared. Dental appointment on the 28th rescheduled. It was boring, logistical, brutally normal. It was a plan written not for me but around me, like paths cut in a field that never passed the porch where I waited. I sat on the low step that divides the storage area from the little room where we kept old Christmas lights and a box of our son's kindergarten art. The cold came up through the boards and into my legs, until I did not know if I was shaking from that or from the moment itself. 11 years of marriage. One house on East 52nd Street with the big live oak that sheds leaves like paper. One son, Gabriel, 9 years old, who still says goodnight with his whole mouth against my cheek. One shared IRA with a balance that creeps up like a tired ant hauling a crumb. 2 cars, 1 sensible Civic, and 1 truck he said was necessary for lumber runs that never seemed to happen. 100 holidays where we were mostly happy even when we were not. The math did not let this fit. Yet the smell on the sweater was real. The ticket was real. Reality does not negotiate. The steps overhead creaked and I looked up, expecting his feet, expecting a coughing lie and a sleepy voice. The ceiling stayed still. He was asleep on the couch after another late call with a client in California. At least that is what he told me as he yawned and rubbed his eyes and said, "Sorry, babe. Go to bed. I will be up in a minute." I saw it differently now. The pauses in the kitchen when his phone buzzed and his mouth softened. The way he stood at the basement door last week and said, "There are mice down there again. Do not go tonight. It is gross." The extra toothbrush hidden inside a gym bag he kept in the trunk. The second cologne, powdery and sweet, that I smelled once and told myself was a sample he got for free and forgot to throw away. I had been translating a foreign language by guessing every other word and filling the rest with hope. I put everything back exactly as it was. Every edge aligned, the passport face down, the ticket inside, the sweater straightened. I closed the zipper gently, as if the suitcase had something fragile inside. When I stood, the world tilted, not wildly like in movies, but just enough to make me reach for the steel support post with a hand that did not feel like mine. I thought of our first apartment, 2nd floor, the one with the balcony where he proposed because he could not wait for the trip he had planned to Tybee that got rained out. He cried then, or said he did, because he turned his face and I never saw the tears. I said yes with a laugh that sounded like the person I imagined I would become. I thought of the night in 2016 when he said he wanted to start a small woodworking business in the garage, and I took $2,000 from my emergency fund and handed it over because faith looks like an open palm. The sawdust smell felt honest. The orders trickled in. The money trickled out. In 2019, he said the market was crowded and we could always sell the tools. We never did. The shelves still hold clamps like sleeping birds. I carried the heaviness of that suitcase up the stairs without touching it. In the kitchen, the digital clock glowed 2:41. The sink held a single glass with a ring of orange juice dried to a sticky halo. The house was so quiet I could hear the whisper of the air vent above the stove. I poured water and it tasted like pennies, and I swallowed anyway. I told myself to breathe. In, out. I reached for something solid in memory and found the summer of 2020 when I worked the COVID wing and came home smelling like bleach and fear while he cooked pasta and left notes that said things like, "Proud of you," and taped drawings from Gabriel to the fridge so I would feel less like a ghost passing through our own life. He held me when I cried in the driveway because I could not stop picturing the hands of a patient that kept reaching for me even after we sedated him. He stroked my hair and said, "You are the strongest person I know." I believe now that he loved the way my strength made him seem bigger, without requiring him to grow. The first lie I ever told him was small. I said I liked the beach when we were dating because he loved it, and then spent years pretending I did not mind sand in everything we owned. The first lie he ever told me: I cannot date. Lies do not wear labels. They braid themselves into ordinary days, and you do not notice the texture change until it is a rope around your ribs. I stared at the basement door and felt a steadiness arrive inside the chaos. A thin, bright line like the one that appears along the horizon before the sun makes a decision. If he was leaving, I needed to know whether I had been abandoned or spared. The difference matters. It changes how you carry the next hour. I took my phone from the charger and opened our bank app. My thumb hovered, then pressed. Transactions bloomed like pins on a map. A hotel charge in Jacksonville 2 weekends earlier, another in Charlotte in January, the same date as his supposed one night in Atlanta. Restaurant names I did not recognize, check amounts that made me swallow hard: $78, $122. A florist on Victory Drive on February 13th. That was not for me because I spent the 14th on night shift and came home to a hug and a kiss and a simple dinner and a quick, apologetic, "Sorry, I forgot to pick up flowers. You know I am terrible at holidays." The numbers were louder than any confession. They were also calm. That is the cruelty of arithmetic. It does not shout. It sits there. True. When I walked to the living room, he was face down on the couch with the blanket kicked to the floor, mouth open, breath catching at the end of each exhale like a car shifting gears badly. The television asked if I was still watching. I stood over him for a full minute and counted. 1, 2, 3. I looked at the notch on his right ear from a childhood bike accident, at the worry line between his eyebrows that I once kissed away. I thought of waking him with the ticket in my hand and the passport on his chest, and a question he would not be able to answer politely. But the version of me who acts from fury only lives in short films. The real me plans. The real me checks the calendar on the wall and sees April 3rd circled in pencil, not pen, because pencil can be erased. The real me notices a small, ordinary thing I had missed every day for months. The basement key was no longer on the hook by the pantry. He had moved it to the drawer under the foil and plastic wrap where you have to pause to find it. He had been training me not to look. I went back downstairs and took photographs of everything inside the suitcase. Every label, every scribble in the notebook, the passport photo, the boarding pass. I placed each item with the care of a nurse laying out instruments for a surgery I knew would hurt. When I zipped the suitcase shut, I whispered, not to him, not to her, but to the girl I had been when I said yes on a balcony under a bad sky. I said, I see you. I said, we will not drown. The light above me flickered twice, then steadied. In that cheap basement glow, I understood that love can be a kind of illness when it demands you ignore your own temperature. I picked up the phone and typed a short message to a number I had not used in 2 years, my cousin Anna, who works the early shift at the airport. I wrote, I need to ask you something about flights on April 3rd. Then I deleted it. Then I wrote it again. Then I saved it in drafts and sat on the step with my knees against my chest until the washing machine finished its cycle and the house fell into a silence that sounded like the moment right before rain. I did not sleep that night. The clock mocked me from every corner, numbers glowing like open wounds. At 4:12 a.m., I found myself at the dining table, staring at the scratches carved into the wood from Gabriel's math homework, his pencil pressing too hard as he practiced long division. The table was supposed to be a family anchor, the place where everything returned to balance, where spaghetti dinners and birthday cakes filled the silence. But that morning it felt like a witness. Like the wood itself wanted to tell me it had seen too much already. I pressed my palms against it and whispered questions into the grain. Questions no piece of furniture could answer. How many nights had he spent rehearsing his absence while I was counting pills for a patient, or folding socks in the laundry room? How long had this plan existed in our home like a ghost I never noticed? The weight of the photographs in my phone became unbearable. I scrolled through them again. The passport face, the boarding pass, the notes in his handwriting. I enlarged the numbers written in blue ink until they blurred into pixels, as if staring harder might reveal mercy. My throat ached, not from crying, because no tears came, but from holding them back as if I could keep my world intact by refusing to let water fall. The refrigerator hummed, a steady sound, and I realized that life does not pause when betrayal unfolds. It keeps running, relentless, forcing you to decide whether to collapse or to stand. At 6:35 a.m., Gabriel padded into the kitchen, hair messy, pajamas twisted. He rubbed his eyes and asked if there was cereal. I nodded, poured milk into a chipped bowl, and forced my hand not to shake. He sat, spoon clinking, unaware that his father had already written a future that erased us. I watched him chew and thought about the ticket again, the seat number, the quiet certainty that she would sit there while we sat here. It was the kind of cruelty you do not shout about. It is the kind that whispers and lets you drown slowly. When my husband finally walked in, hair damp from the shower, shirt buttoned wrong at the collar, he kissed the top of my head and said good morning. His voice was warm, familiar, the same one that once asked me if I believed in forever. I wanted to hold up my phone and show him the photographs, make him choke on the weight of his own script, but I didn't. Instead, I studied him as if he were a stranger borrowing my kitchen. The smell of his cologne mixed with the steam of the coffee maker, and for the first time I noticed it did not settle on me but repelled me. He spoke about deadlines and supply orders, about a coworker's mistake that cost the company hours of work. Every word was casual, practiced. Every word built a wall higher between us. At 8:02 he left, keys jangling, truck engine rumbling down the street. The silence after the door shut was different from before. It was heavy, a silence filled with knowledge. I sat at the kitchen table again, phone in hand, and opened the bank transactions a second time. This time, I looked deeper, scrolling back through months, through years. The pattern stretched farther than I dared imagine. A rental car in Miami in 2022, a hotel in Dallas in 2021, dinners in cities he never mentioned. He had been carving a second life while I built a first one for all of us. My chest tightened until I thought I might faint, until the edges of the room curled like paper near a flame. I closed my eyes and tried to anchor myself in the years of sacrifice that had brought me here. The 12-hour hospital shifts during the pandemic, when he promised to handle groceries and bills so I could rest, only for me to discover later that payments were late, that groceries were cheap replacements, that he was careless while I was breaking myself to keep us steady. The overtime shifts I took in 2018 to save for Gabriel's braces, 3 months of aching feet, while he insisted on upgrading his truck tires because safety came first. I remembered the nights I massaged his back when he said stress from work was killing him, the nights I whispered encouragement into a man who was already giving his strength to someone else. All those years, all those sacrifices, they clung to me like lead. And yet, underneath the suffocating pain, a thought whispered, maybe I was freer than I knew. I needed proof beyond receipts and photographs. I needed to hear it from him, or to see him falter when faced with his own lies. I waited 2 days. I let normal life continue, let Gabriel go to school, let dinners play out as if nothing had cracked beneath us. But I watched every detail. I saw the way he placed his phone face down, the way his eyes flicked toward the basement door like it was a secret keeper, the way he smiled at me without letting it touch his eyes. And on the third night, when he fell asleep early, I slipped back into the basement and searched deeper. In the far corner, behind boxes labeled Christmas and Gabriel's old clothes, I found another suitcase, this one smaller, almost hidden. Inside were documents in both their names, copies of lease agreements, bank statements from an account I had never seen before, an account with over $12,000. My hands trembled so violently the paper slipped, and I dropped to my knees on the cold concrete to gather them. This was not just betrayal. It was a double life, crafted carefully, funded by the hours I had sweated away in sterile hospital corridors. I pressed the papers against my chest as if clutching them would make sense of it all. But it didn't. It only deepened the ache, the sense of having lived in a house built on sand. I carried the papers upstairs, spread them across the dining table, and stared at them until the numbers blurred. He had been siphoning money, redirecting energy, rewriting our family's story without permission. And in that moment, Something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, raw and searing, but it was joined by resolve. If he was planning to leave us behind, I needed to decide whether to wait for the blow or to write my own ending. On the morning of March 21st, I sat in my car outside Memorial Hospital with the papers folded neatly in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. The steering wheel felt slick against my palms, though my hands were dry. The sun came up pale and slow over the Savannah skyline, glinting off the river as if it were mocking me for being awake so early with the truth burning holes in my chest. I had spent 3 nights barely sleeping, memorizing every detail of those hidden accounts, every date that matched a lie he had told, every dollar amount that carried the weight of my sacrifices. The air in the car was stale with the scent of old coffee, and I stared at the envelope like it was a living thing that could answer questions if only I opened it again. But it couldn't. It was just proof, lifeless and cold, while I was left to figure out what to do with it. Inside the hospital, the corridors smelled like disinfectant and sweat, like the lives we tried to keep together with machines and prayers. My shift was supposed to start at 7 but I couldn't focus on charts or vitals. I kept thinking about how many hours I had poured into this place, how many holidays I had traded for extra pay, all while he was laying the bricks of another future without me. A colleague asked if I was okay. I smiled, said I was tired, the same excuse I had used for years. Tiredness covers so much. It can hide heartbreak, suspicion, even the quiet rage that grows in your chest like a storm you cannot yet name. When I came home that evening, Gabriel was sprawled on the rug with his Lego sets, building a tower so high it leaned. He looked up and grinned, asking if I could help him balance it. My throat tightened because in that moment I knew what was at stake. It wasn't just my marriage collapsing. It was his world, the trust he carried in his small body, the safety he thought was eternal. I sat on the floor with him, snapping pieces into place, and whispered promises I couldn't yet keep, that he would be safe, that no matter what, I would never abandon him. The tower fell once, clattering loudly, and he laughed, but I felt tears sting because it sounded like the sound of my life breaking. That night, after Gabriel was in bed, I watched my husband from the kitchen doorway. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I wanted to scream, to hurl the envelope onto his lap, to demand answers right there in the glow of the television, but I didn't. Instead, I studied him the way a surgeon studies a patient before an operation, memorizing every habit, every defense he might use. I realized then that confrontation without preparation would leave me broken while he spun another web of excuses. He was good at it, too good, and I had been trained for too long to believe them. The following day, I decided to test him. Over dinner, I mentioned casually that one of my coworkers was planning a trip to Portugal in April. I watched his fork pause, just for a second, before he forced a laugh and asked who would go there in spring when the weather was unpredictable. It was a small slip, so small most people wouldn't notice, but I did. His eyes flickered toward the basement door before he reached for his glass of water. That single look was enough to confirm everything. He was already living in the future he planned with her, and we were just placeholders until the departure date. I couldn't keep it all inside anymore. On March 24th, I drove to my cousin Anna's house after work, the one person I trusted not to turn my pain into gossip. She worked at the airport, had seen people leaving and arriving with faces full of stories they never spoke aloud. I laid the photographs on her table, the envelope spread open like an autopsy. She didn't speak for a long time, just looked at me with eyes that had seen too much in her own life. Finally, she asked if I wanted her to look into the flight, to confirm the reservation under that name. My stomach twisted, but I nodded. Proof had become a kind of oxygen. I needed it, even if it burned my lungs. That night, back home, I found myself standing at the basement door again. The air around it felt heavier, as if the lies stored below seeped upward through the cracks. I opened it slowly, listening to the creak of the hinge, and walked down with a flashlight even though the bulb still worked. The beam swept across the silver suitcase, the smaller bag, the boxes stacked neatly like soldiers. I crouched down and ran my hand along the zipper, not to open it again, but to remind myself it was real. not a dream I had conjured from paranoia. My fingers traced the cold metal, and I whispered into the shadows, "I see you. I know you exist. I will not be erased." 2 days later, Anna called me during lunch break. Her voice was steady, but her words shook me. Yes, the reservation was real. Yes, the ticket was confirmed under Eva Martin's. Yes, it was paid in full. My knees buckled against the wall of the staff lounge, and I slid to the floor, clutching the phone as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. Around me, the noise of nurses laughing, microwaves beeping, life continuing as if mine hadn't just been split open. I whispered thank you and hung up, my throat raw. The last sliver of denial vanished, and all that remained was the truth. My husband was leaving us, and he was taking the best of himself somewhere I was not invited. That night, I watched him sleep again, his chest rising and falling with deceptive peace. I thought about the years I had stood beside him, the holidays I worked so he wouldn't have to, the debts I helped him pay, the dreams I sacrificed because he said timing wasn't right. I thought about the wedding vows spoken under a summer sun, about the promises whispered in the dark of our first apartment, and I thought about how he was willing to trade all of it for a one-way seat in 12A beside a woman who had never scrubbed his shirts free of grease, never held him through a fever, never carried his secrets except the ones he wanted her to. But even through the rage, something unexpected stirred in me that night. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a clarity sharper than the pain. If he could write his story without me, then I had the right to write mine without him. I realized that the years of sacrifice had not just built his escape, they had also built my strength. And for the first time since opening that suitcase, I felt something close to power in my chest. The question was no longer if I would confront him, but when and how. The morning of March 27th broke humid and heavy, the kind of air that makes the curtains cling to the window frame and your skin feel too tight. I moved through the kitchen as if I were rehearsing a role, pouring cereal for Gabriel, asking about his spelling test, smiling at the right moments. But inside, my chest was a knot of wire. Every time my husband looked at me, I wondered if he could see it, if the knowledge I carried had carved new lines into my face. He kissed Gabriel's head, picked up his coffee, and left with the same casual ease as always. The door shut, and the silence returned, thick and accusing. I stood there staring at the handle, my mind whispering, "He is leaving you in less than a week." I called Anna again that afternoon. Her voice was low, steady, almost surgical. She told me she had checked further, that the ticket wasn't just a plan. It was tied to an apartment rental in Lisbon, a furnished flat booked for 6 months. My hand froze around the phone. 6 months. Not a fling, not a reckless trip, but a whole life carved out, funded by money I had bled to earn. I pressed my forehead to the cool hospital window and let the city blur into shapes. For a moment I thought about throwing the phone against the wall, shattering it the way my life already was. But I didn't. Instead, I thanked her, my voice breaking, and hung up. That night, I cooked dinner the way I always did. Chicken, rice, vegetables, because normalcy had become my shield. He sat across from me, chewing, nodding at Gabriel's stories about school. I studied him like a stranger at my table, noticing the small things. The way his eyes softened when he listened to our son, the faint scar on his hand from a woodworking accident years ago, the easy rhythm of his laugh. For a split second, I almost let myself believe it was all still real. But then I remembered the suitcase, the passport, the lease in Lisbon, and the illusion shattered. Love, I realized, is not erased in one moment. It is dismantled piece by piece until you cannot recognize what you are holding. When Gabriel was asleep, I asked him casually about the Atlanta conference he had mentioned months earlier. He paused, then smiled, sipping his beer, and told me it had been postponed. Postponed. My throat burned with the effort of not screaming. He looked so calm, so sure, so practiced in his lies. I nodded, pretending to accept it. But inside, I cataloged every word. Postponed was a placeholder, a shield, an insult. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, and leaned against the sink until my reflection blurred. I pressed both hands against the counter and whispered to the woman staring back. "You're not crazy. You're not making this up. You know the truth." Over the next days, I became an observer in my own life. I noticed the way he checked his watch more often, how he disappeared into the garage for longer stretches, how he seemed distracted at dinner, his fork hovering mid-air as if he were already eating somewhere else. I noticed the way he guarded his phone, how he slipped away to take calls in the backyard, how his laughter carried in the dark. I collected these details like evidence, not because I needed more proof, but because the habit of documenting helped me breathe. By March 30th, I could no longer carry it alone. I sat Gabriel down at the kitchen table after school, my hands folded tightly in front of me. I didn't tell him everything. I couldn't. He was only 9. But I told him that Daddy might be going away for a while, that things might change. His eyes widened, confusion swimming in them, and he asked if we had done something wrong. My heart cracked in two, and I pulled him into my arms, whispering that none of it was his fault, that he was loved, that no matter what happened, I would never leave him. He clung to me with small hands that shook, and in that moment, I swore I would not let my husband's betrayal define our future. That night, I lay awake beside the man who had been my partner for more than a decade, listening to his steady breathing. I stared at the ceiling and thought of all the years I had traded for this moment. The extra shifts, the missed holidays, the exhaustion that carved shadows under my eyes. I thought about the day in 2015 when we signed the mortgage papers and I believed we were building forever. I thought about how he held me in 2020 when the hospital nearly broke me, how he whispered that I was his rock. I realized then that manipulation often wears the mask of comfort, that love can be a chain disguised as a promise. On March 31st, I made my decision. I would confront him, not with screams, not with accusations he could twist, but with the weight of his own choices laid bare. I gathered the photographs, the bank records, the lease, every piece of proof I had collected, and placed them in the envelope again. My hands no longer shook. My breathing was steady. This was not about begging him to stay or demanding explanations. This was about reclaiming myself, about refusing to be erased by the story he had already written. When I looked at the calendar hanging by the fridge, April 3rd was still circled lightly in pencil. 2 days left before his escape. 2 days left before I decided whether to let him walk away or to force him to face the wreckage he had created. The house felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks, the air heavy with what was about to come. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something almost like strength blooming beneath the grief. April arrived with a cruel kind of clarity. The morning of the 1st was bright, the kind of Savannah spring day when the air smells faintly of jasmine and the azaleas burst into impossible color. I watched from the porch as neighbors waved, dogs tugged at leashes, children biked past with backpacks slung loose. The world looked normal, steady, dependable. And yet, in 2 days, my husband was planning to vanish into an airport terminal with another woman's passport and a suitcase full of lies. That knowledge made the sunlight feel false, like a set piece painted too brightly for a play that no longer deserved an audience. I had rehearsed the confrontation 100 times in my head. In some versions, I screamed until my throat gave out, every wound spilling into the air like smoke. In others, I whispered the truth so calmly that it left him no space to hide. But when the moment finally came, it unfolded in a way I hadn't imagined. It was April 2nd, the night before his flight. Gabriel was asleep, the house wrapped in silence. My husband sat at the table sorting through papers, muttering about invoices, his pen tapping against the wood. I walked in with the manila envelope pressed to my chest. My heart thudded so hard I thought he would hear it before I spoke. I placed the envelope on the table between us and slid it toward him. His pen stopped tapping. He looked at me, then at the envelope, then back at me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, my breathing came ragged. Finally, he reached for it, opened the flap, and began pulling out the photographs one by one. The passport, the ticket, the bank statements. His face drained of color, and then astonishingly, he laughed. Not a joyful laugh, but a short, sharp exhale, like someone caught in a game who suddenly realized the rules had shifted. "So, you've been spying on me," he said quietly, his eyes narrowing. "I've been surviving you," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. He leaned back in the chair, fingers drumming against the table, the silence stretching between us like a tightrope. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He didn't even attempt to explain. Instead, he looked at me with a coldness I had never seen before and asked the question that broke something inside me. "What do you want me to do about it?" The words sliced through me because they revealed the truth I had been avoiding. This wasn't a mistake, a weakness, a lapse in judgment. This was a choice. He had chosen her, chosen the escape, chosen to leave us behind. And now, faced with my knowledge, he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking what price he had to pay to make me disappear from his plan. I sat down slowly, hands folded on the table, and told him the only thing I knew for sure. "You don't get to erase me. You don't get to erase Gabriel. Whatever you thought this was going to be, it ends tonight." His jaw tightened, his fingers clenched into fists. And for a moment I thought he might shout, might rage, might try to twist the story back into his favor. But he didn't. He simply gathered the papers back into the envelope, shoved it aside, and stood up. He walked to the sink, ran the water, and splashed his face like a man trying to wake from a nightmare. When he turned back, his eyes were red but dry. "You'll never understand," he whispered. "You never did." Those words echoed in my head long after he left the kitchen. I lay awake that night listening to his movements upstairs, the creak of floorboards, the zip of suitcases being closed. He didn't bother hiding it anymore. The pretense was gone. The marriage was gone. What remained was the wreckage, the silence, and my decision about how to carry both. On the morning of April 3rd, I stood in the doorway with Gabriel still asleep in his room, the dawn light spilling through the blinds. My husband walked past me with his suitcase, his eyes forward, his lips pressed tight. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't even look back. The truck engine started, roared, and faded down the street until the house was wrapped in a silence so deep it rang in my ears. I stood there gripping the doorframe, the wood pressing into my palm, and felt an unexpected calm. The years of sacrifice, the lies, the manipulation, all of it had led to this moment, where I was finally free of the illusion. My chest hurt, my hands shook, but beneath it all there was something steady. I whispered into the empty house, a promise only Gabriel and I would ever hear. "We will not be erased. We will build something new." The silence after the truck disappeared was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a Sunday morning, or the soft hush after Gabriel drifted to sleep. It was an emptiness that pressed against the walls, a vacuum where a life used to be. I walked through the house as if I were cataloging evidence, touching the back of the couch where he always sat, the dent in the mattress where he used to lie, the mug he left on the counter with a ring of coffee at the bottom. Every object had been turned into a witness, testifying against him in their stillness. Gabriel woke late that morning, rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up in all directions. He asked where Daddy was, his voice casual, unaware of the storm that had already passed through our home. I swallowed hard and told him Daddy had to go away for work for a while. His brow furrowed, suspicion flickering across his young face, but he nodded slowly as if willing himself to accept it. Children, I realized, understand more than we give them credit for. He hugged me longer than usual that morning before heading off to school, his small arms clinging as if he sensed that something permanent had shifted. After he left, I sat at the dining table with the envelope of documents still resting there, the evidence of betrayal heavy and undeniable. For years I had believed that my sacrifices were building a future for us, a home, stability, the kind of family I never had growing up. But as I stared at the papers, I realized those sacrifices had been redirected, stolen, invested in a dream that excluded me. And yet, for the first time, I began to see them differently. They weren't wasted. They had made me stronger, resilient, capable of carrying Gabriel and myself through this storm. My work, my sweat, my patience. They were mine, not his. He had taken advantage of them, but he could not erase what they had built inside me. That afternoon, I opened a new bank account in my name only. I gathered every document I could find, every bill, every record, and began the slow process of reclaiming control. It felt mechanical at first, a series of tasks to distract me from the hollow ache in my chest. But with each signature, each password reset, each small act of independence, a piece of myself returned. The woman who had once believed in forever was gone, but in her place stood someone harder, clearer, unwilling to be erased. That evening, as the sun set and shadows stretched across the living room, Gabriel and I sat on the floor piecing together another Lego tower. It wobbled, threatened to fall, but we steadied it together, our hands moving in sync. When it finally stood tall, he grinned up at me, his eyes bright, his faith still intact. I realized then that this was what mattered. Not the man who had walked away, not the lies that had poisoned our home, but the boy who still looked at me as if I were his anchor. When I tucked him into bed that night, he asked quietly if Daddy was coming back. My throat tightened, but I met his eyes and told him the truth as gently as I could. I didn't know. What I did know, I told him, was that we would be okay, no matter what. He nodded, pressed his face against my chest, and whispered, "As long as you don't leave." The promise caught in my throat, heavy with truth, and I whispered back, "Never. I will never leave." As the house settled into its new silence, I stood by the window watching the streetlights flicker on. The future was uncertain, jagged, full of unanswered questions. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of agency, a fragile but growing belief that I could shape what came next. The years of manipulation had broken something in me, yes, but they had also revealed a strength I hadn't known I possessed. And as the night deepened, I whispered to myself the words I wanted to believe. This is not the end. This is the beginning. The days after his departure blurred together in a strange rhythm of shock and routine. The house seemed larger without him, its silence echoing in rooms that once carried his footsteps and his voice. At first, every sound unsettled me. The creak of the stairs, the hum of the refrigerator, the slam of a car door outside. I kept expecting him to return, suitcase in hand, ready with another excuse polished to perfection. But he didn't. Each hour that passed without his return confirmed what I already knew. He had chosen another life, and we were no longer part of it. At work, I carried myself like a machine. I checked charts, adjusted IVs, answered calls, all with a practiced smile that fooled almost everyone. But inside, I was unraveling. In the quiet moments between tasks, I replayed every memory, every conversation, searching for the first fracture. Was it in 2017 when he stayed late at the office 3 nights in a row? Was it in 2020 when I thought his exhaustion mirrored mine? But maybe it was from hiding something instead. Or had it started earlier, in the small dismissals I ignored, the secrets I thought were harmless? Betrayal is not a single event. It is a series of tiny cuts that bleed together until you realize you are drowning. At night, I lay awake listening to Gabriel breathe in the next room, his soft murmurs in sleep grounding me. Sometimes he called out in his dreams, and I would sit by his bed, stroking his hair, whispering comfort until his face relaxed again. He didn't ask about his father as often as I feared. When he did, the questions were simple. "Do you think he's okay?" Or, "When will he call?" I answered carefully, balancing honesty with protection. I told him his father was safe, that he might call soon, that none of this was Gabriel's fault. Each time I swallowed the bitterness that rose in my throat, because my son deserved tenderness, not the weight of my rage. One evening, as I folded laundry, I found one of his shirts tucked at the back of the drawer, the scent of his cologne still faint on the fabric. My chest tightened, and I pressed it to my face before I realized what I was doing. The smell brought back years of moments. His arm around me at a Christmas party, his laughter on a beach trip, his warmth in bed on a winter morning. For a few seconds, I let myself grieve not just the man he became, but the man I thought he was. And then I folded the shirt neatly and placed it in a box, a small act of control in a life that felt shattered. Anna called me a week later. Her voice was cautious, as if she were stepping onto fragile glass. She told me she had checked again, that he had arrived in Lisbon on schedule, that the rental apartment had been occupied. Hearing it confirmed didn't surprise me. It only solidified the truth. He hadn't wavered, hadn't hesitated, hadn't looked back. He had stepped into a new life as easily as shutting a door. I thanked her, my voice steady, and hung up. And for the first time, I didn't cry. Instead, I walked to Gabriel's room and watched him build another Lego tower, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he looked up and smiled, I felt something shift. Yes, my marriage had ended in betrayal. Yes, the years of sacrifice had been twisted into someone else's escape. But here, in this room, with this child, there was still something pure, something worth protecting. He was my anchor now, and I would not let his father's choices define the life we would build together. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered a vow into the dark. Not a vow to him, not even a vow to myself, but to Gabriel. I promised him that our story would not end in abandonment, that we would rise from this wreckage, piece by piece, and carve a life where lies could not take root. The promise steadied me, a quiet fire in the hollow space his absence left behind. The weeks stretched into April, and the rhythm of life without him began to take shape in ways I hadn't expected. At first, it was survival, paying bills, making meals, answering Gabriel's questions with a steady voice even when I wanted to collapse. But gradually, almost without noticing, survival turned into something else. I woke before dawn not from dread, but from determination, lacing up my shoes to walk the quiet streets of our neighborhood. The air was cool, the birds loud, and for the first time in years, I listened to my own breath without the weight of someone else's needs pressing it down. Still, the betrayal lived inside me like a second heartbeat. Every corner of the house carried echoes. The garage where he once promised a woodworking business that never grew. The porch swing where he asked me to marry him. The bed where he whispered about forever. I moved through these spaces like a curator in a museum of lies, cataloging each artifact with both rage and sorrow. And yet, strangely, there was also a sense of ownership returning. These spaces were mine again, not props in a performance he had scripted, but rooms where I could write something new. One Saturday afternoon, I took Gabriel to Forsyth Park. The fountain sparkled under the sunlight, children darted between trees, and the air smelled of grass and roasted peanuts from a vendor cart. Gabriel ran ahead, laughing, his sneakers flashing white as he chased other kids. I sat on a bench watching him, and it struck me that this was what healing looked like. Not forgetting, not erasing, but choosing moments of light even while shadows lingered. A woman beside me struck up a conversation, asking about Gabriel, and for the first time I introduced myself as simply me, not as someone's wife. The words felt strange but freeing, like shedding a skin that had grown too tight. Nights were the hardest. The bed felt too large, the silence too heavy. Sometimes I caught myself reaching for the other side, expecting warmth that would never return. Other times I replayed the confrontation at the table, wishing I had said more, or less, or differently. But gradually, the silence became less of an enemy. I began reading again, books that had gathered dust for years. I wrote in a journal, pouring out the rage, the grief, the questions, until the pages themselves felt heavy with all I had carried. Writing didn't fix the pain, but it gave it shape, and somehow that made it easier to bear. One evening in late April, Gabriel asked me if we could plant a tree in the backyard. He said it would grow tall enough to see from his window, a reminder that things could still reach for the sky. We bought a young oak from a nursery, dug a hole together, our hands covered in dirt. As we lowered the tree into the earth, I felt something shift inside me. Planting it wasn't just about the yard. It was about reclaiming roots, about proving to ourselves that new life could grow even after betrayal tried to scorch the ground. Gabriel patted the soil with his small hands and whispered, "This one is ours." That night, after he fell asleep, I stood at the window looking at the fragile tree silhouetted against the moonlight. For the first time since that night in the basement, I allowed myself to imagine a future not defined by his choices. A future where my strength, my sacrifices, and my love for my son built something indestructible. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but alongside it was something new, a seed of resilience, small but alive. By May, the rawness had dulled into something different. It wasn't gone. The betrayal still lived under my skin like a scar that hadn't finished healing, but it no longer bled every time I touched it. Instead, it pulsed quietly, reminding me of what had been lost and what I had survived. Life began to rebuild itself in small, almost invisible ways. The mailbox still filled with bills, the dishes still stacked after dinner. Gabriel still needed help with homework and rides to soccer practice. In the constancy of those routines, I found steadiness. At work, people began to notice a shift. My colleagues told me I looked lighter, though I hadn't lost weight. They said my laugh sounded different, freer, even though I didn't feel like laughing most of the time. What they didn't see was the steel beneath the surface. Every patient I cared for, every life I helped steady in the hospital reminded me of my own. Healing was never instant. It was a slow, deliberate choice to keep moving, even when the body wanted to collapse. I carried that truth home with me, folding it into my days like a mantra. But the ghosts still appeared. Some nights, I dreamt of him at the airport, boarding pass in hand, walking toward a gate that never led back. I would wake up gasping, my chest tight, and find myself reaching for the other side of the bed. Other times, I caught the scent of his cologne in a grocery aisle or saw a man with his posture at a stoplight, and my heart would lurch before I reminded myself he was thousands of miles away, living a life I had been written out of. The ache wasn't about wanting him back. It was about mourning the woman I had been before the lie cracked her open. One evening, as Gabriel and I ate dinner at the kitchen table, he looked up and asked a question that stopped me cold. "Mom, do you think Daddy loved us at all?" His voice was soft, almost hesitant, as if he already knew the answer. I set down my fork and reached for his hand. The truth sat heavy on my tongue, bitter and complicated. Finally, I told him that love isn't always enough to make people stay, that sometimes people choose their own paths even when it hurts others. His eyes filled with tears, and I pulled him into my arms, whispering that no matter what, I loved him enough for both of us. That night, I realized the depth of what had been stolen wasn't just my marriage. It was Gabriel's innocence, the belief that family was unbreakable. I felt fury rise, sharp and white-hot, but I also felt resolve. If his father had left us with emptiness, then I would fill that space with something stronger. I would give Gabriel a foundation that no lie could shake. In June, the oak tree we planted began to sprout its first real leaves. Every morning, Gabriel checked it from his window, reporting proudly on its growth. Watching it reach upward, fragile but determined, I saw a reflection of us. We had been uprooted, abandoned, but here we were, planting ourselves again, refusing to wither. And as the branches stretched toward the sky, so did a part of me I thought had been destroyed. For the first time since the suitcase, I began to imagine not just survival, but possibility. A life built on truth, even if it was only mine and Gabriel's. A future where sacrifice wasn't swallowed by someone else's lies, but transformed into strength. The fear still whispered. The grief still lingered. But hope began to rise, quiet and steady, like leaves unfolding in the sun. Summer arrived heavy and bright, the kind of southern heat that makes the air shimmer above the asphalt and presses against your lungs like a weight. By then, months had passed since that morning when his truck rolled down the street for the last time, but the memory of it was still carved into me. It didn't hurt in the same jagged way anymore. It had settled into something quieter, like a deep bruise you press now and then to remind yourself of how far you've come. Life without him had become our new normal. Gabriel and I built routines that didn't depend on anyone else. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, movie nights with popcorn on the couch, quiet walks in the park where he would chatter about his favorite books. I began to notice how his laughter came easier, brighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from his small shoulders. He still asked about his father sometimes, but less often now, and when he did, the questions carried less ache. I always answered gently, truthfully, but with enough softness to protect him. There were still nights when the loneliness felt sharp, when I rolled over in bed and reached instinctively for a presence that wasn't there. Sometimes I caught myself reliving old memories, the good ones, wondering if any of it had been real, or if it was all just part of the performance he staged while building another life. The question gnawed at me, but slowly I learned to live without needing the answer. What mattered wasn't whether his love had been real. It was that mine had been. My years of sacrifice, my loyalty, my devotion, they were not wasted. They had shaped me into someone stronger than his betrayal could ever destroy. One evening in late July, I sat on the porch watching the oak tree in the backyard. Its branches had stretched higher, small leaves trembling in the warm breeze. Gabriel sat beside me, his legs swinging, his face lit by the last gold light of the day. "It's getting bigger," he said proudly. I nodded, feeling tears sting my eyes. Not from sorrow, but from something else, something like pride. That tree would outgrow us one day, standing tall long after the lies and the pain had faded. It was proof that new life can rise from broken ground. In those quiet moments, I realized the unexpected gift buried inside the wreckage: freedom. For years, I had been bound by his promises, blinded by his manipulations, weighed down by sacrifices I thought were shared, but were only mine to carry. Now, stripped of the illusion, I was free to write a story that belonged only to me and to Gabriel. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be struggles, loneliness, and moments of doubt, but it would be honest. And honesty, I had learned, is worth more than any dream built on lies. Looking back, I understood that discovery in the basement was both an ending and a beginning. The passport, the ticket, the suitcases, they weren't just evidence of betrayal, they were also keys that unlocked the prison I hadn't known I was living in. That night when the light flickered above the concrete floor, I thought it was mocking me. Now, I believe it was warning me, preparing me for the storm that would strip me bare so I could finally see myself clearly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I turned to Gabriel and whispered a promise. Not just for him, but for myself. "We're going to be okay," I said. "Better than okay. We're going to grow, just like that tree, stronger every day." He smiled, leaning his head against my shoulder, and in that moment, I felt the truth of it. The past would always live inside me, but it no longer defined me. The years of sacrifice, the manipulation, the impossible choices, the lies uncovered, they were chapters in a story that had broken me open only to show me the strength I never knew I carried. And as the stars began to pierce the night sky, I let myself breathe deeply, fully, knowing that this was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new one,